like Kosovo, then you can get a resolution.
Finally, do you have the Prime Minister's support for this plan? Have you spoken to him about it?
No, I have not spoken to the Prime Minister about it. This is something which, after a 2-week trip as chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, meeting with officials in the UK and France and the US, that I've come firmly to believe in, and that is why I'm putting this proposition forward today.
Liberal MP Dan Tan speaking to Eliza Barello. There's a push from within for the federal government to not only offer same-sex marriage to the people, but to make it a full constitutional referendum. The coalition is still discussing the details of its new approach. Tony Abbott says determining whether the law is changed to allow marriage equality should be the people's choice. The Social Services Minister Scott Morrison is suggesting that could be a full constitutional referendum on the question of how to define marriage. Political correspondent Louise Yaxley reports.
Mr Abbott's promoting his plan to put gay marriage to a vote as giving the people a say. But it's not clear if that would be a plebiscite where a question is posed to test the national views or a referendum. Yesterday, the Treasurer Joe Hockey told Radio National they're both options.
There will either be the opportunity for people to have a free vote, or there will be a plebiscite where there is a question put to the Australian people, or that there will be a referendum to change the Constitution, Section 5121, where it's defined as the Commonwealth having power over marriage.
Last night on the ABC's 7:30, the Social Services Minister Scott Morrison suggested a full referendum.
Simply at the moment, in Clause 21, it just says marriage. Now, you could equally put in there opposite and same-sex marriage and clarify very clearly what the meaning of the Constitution is on this question.
He acknowledged the High Court has already ruled on it.
But what I'm saying is that I would prefer the Australian people decide this, not me, not Justice French, but the Australian country.
The Shadow Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, dismisses that.
Scott Morrison is talking nonsense. When they dealt with this question in relation to the Australian Capital Territory's attempt to legislate on this subject, the High Court made it crystal clear that marriage is a matter for the Commonwealth Parliament to legislate on. The Constitution leaves no doubt on that subject, and as the High Court helpfully made clear in its decision, marriage has changed depending on how the Commonwealth Parliament has chosen to legislate about it at different times, and it can change again.
And back in May this year, when Ireland held a referendum and voted in favour of allowing gay marriage, the Prime Minister rejected a suggestion that Australia could take the same approach.
Under the Constitution, questions of marriage are the preserve of the Commonwealth Parliament. Other matters of regulation of society are normally a matter for the state parliament. Plainly, this is a matter that could quite properly come before the Commonwealth Parliament if members of Parliament wanted it to be raised.
Mr Dreyfus argues against both options, a plebiscite or a referendum, saying they're unnecessary because Parliament can deal with it, and he says there'd be a multi-million-dollar price tag.
Louise Jackson reporting. Well, Labor's Deputy Leader and Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister is Tanya Plibersek, and she joins me now in our Parliament House studio. Tanya Plibersek, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
On Syria, Labor has consistently said its support for military action is only for the action in Iraq. Would you now be open to having Australian forces giving them a wider role?
Well, there's a clear legal basis for Australia's involvement in Iraq, and that's the invitation of the Iraqi government to help it train its own forces to defend its own citizens. There's no such clear legal basis for Australian involvement in Syria. I noticed Dan Tan saying that we should bomb and then go and get the support of the United Nations to do it. If the Prime Minister is interested in Australia now being involved in Syria, he should first declare what is the legal basis for Australian involvement. Australia could urge the UN Security Council or the international community to change its view on this. There is no doubt that there is a humanitarian disaster in Syria. It's a country about the same size as Australia. 11.5 million of its people are internally or externally displaced. But without a clear legal basis for Australian involvement, And without a clear plan, like what does victory in Syria look like, I think it would be very dangerous to send Australian personnel into one of the most dangerous places on earth right now.
The argument, the argument put there by Dan Tehan about the national interest, surely that carries some weight?
Well, Australia is heavily involved in Iraq. We're one of the largest contributors per capita of any country that's involved in the mission in Iraq, and it's clear what our role there is. It's to train Iraqi personnel, and it's to help them protect Iraqi civilians. Without that sort of clarity around Syria, I think it's extraordinary, frankly, that the government sent out a backbencher to start floating ideas without any clear proposal, without any explanation to the Australian people of what the legal basis would be, what the mission would be, what success would look like, what our personnel would be expected to do, and how this would fit in with what the rest of the international community is doing.
There is already a campaign underway in Syria, a banning campaign underway in Syria. Why not be part of it? I mean, there's no legal precedent there.
Well, because as the Prime Minister said not so long ago, it is not clear what legal basis Australia would be involved in such a bombing campaign. I think if the Prime Minister wants us to change our position, he should have the courage to go into the Parliament and make that argument, rather than sending a backbencher out to float an idea and see how people respond.
But you wouldn't support it anyway?
He has made no case. He has made no case that the legal situation has changed. I should also say, very importantly, we have a much greater humanitarian responsibility in Syria, with 11.5 million people displaced, with millions in neighbouring countries like Jordan, like Lebanon, like Turkey. We should be doing more to help, but we've actually reduced our assistance to Syrian refugees.
We've got another couple of issues that I want to get across. On climate and the Paris talks, the government has put up its 26 to 28% target by 2030, which it says, which is well ahead of Japan and of course Korea and a number of other countries, but behind quite a lot of our OECD comparison countries, of course. The government says, though, that it is a respectable figure, it's environmentally responsible, and above all, it's economically responsible.
Well, I don't think any of that stacks up. I think it is extraordinary to use Japan as an example, a country that was hit by a tsunami that closed down its nuclear power industry in response. It's only just getting back on its feet. It's extraordinary to use that as an example. We are the largest per capita emitters of carbon pollution in the world.
But should we do more at any cost? I think that's the issue.
Well, it's not at any cost. So one of the great transformations in the international economy is that countries around the world are reducing their carbon emissions. We can be a world leader in innovating in this area, in the business opportunities that are driven by the clean energy revolution, and we should be.
What sort of targets will Labor present?
Well, we need to see the modelling that the government's basing their figures on first, that they claim that the target they've set would be consistent with a 2% global warming cap that all countries are trying to stay beneath. Our information is that it's more like 3 or 4% based of global warming based on the targets that the Australian government has set.
3 or 4 degrees.
3 or 4 degrees, I'm sorry. They, however, haven't shared any of the modelling. I think it's very important that we make a decision that is based on the science and based on the economics, and the government should share its model.
Well, some of the modelling that was done a few years ago by your government, previous government, showed that it would require between 40 and 60% to keep within that 2-degree band. So is that the sort of level we're looking at from you?
Well, no, I don't think you can use years-old modelling to determine what our position would be now. I think it's very important to have the most up-to-date figures, and we call on the government to release them.
Okay.
I think it is important to say, though, that we have made our 50% renewable energy commitment, and I think that is a very important step to reducing carbon emissions in our economy.
On the issue of same-sex marriage and the plebiscite now, a referendum as it's turning into now, first a plebiscite was raised, now Scott Morrison says a referendum to change the Constitution is also being discussed. Is that something you support?
Well, is this really how we want to spend $120 million of taxpayers' money? I mean, this is extraordinary. The High Court has already decided that the Australian Parliament should legislate, that it has the power to legislate. We've got constitutional experts like Anne Fleming making it very clear that it's the role of the Parliament to legislate in this area. This is an expensive delaying tactic pushed by the opponents of marriage equality.
But why not let the people decide this?
Look, I've got nothing against the people deciding, other than it's going to cost $120 million, but I'd also like the people to decide whether we're going to push the GST rate up from 10 to 15%. I'd like the people to decide whether we're going to cut pensions, as this government's done, whether we're going to have $100,000 university degrees, cut school education funding, cut health funding, and introduce a GP tax. The Australian people should decide on all of these things, shouldn't they?
If we do come to a referendum, if it does come to that, presumably that'll be sometime in 2017 or perhaps 2018, but the question will be the crucial thing, won't it, if it's a referendum? Because we haven't had a great track record of success. How would you like to see frame that question?
Well, I think the question is a very clear one. In a country like Australia, in the 21st century, do we continue to discriminate against one group in our community, law-abiding citizens who want nothing more than to have the legal and public recognition of their relationship? It's not a tough question.
Tanya Plibersek will leave it.
Thank you.
It's Tanya Plibersek, Labor's Deputy Leader and Shadow Foreign Affairs Spokesman. You're listening to AM Around Australia, where it is 14 minutes past 8. What's believed to be an Islamic State-inspired cyber attack, personal phone numbers, email addresses and computer passwords of US and Australian defence employees have been published online. The Australian Federal Police say they're aware of claims by a group calling itself the Islamic State Hacking Division. Police are liaising with state and territory governments and agencies. Brendan Trembach reports.
A long list with the personal details of hundreds of people is being circulated online by the so-called Islamic State Hacking Division. The group says its target is the Crusader Coalition. Victims range from a soldier in the US 4th Infantry Division based at Fort Hood in Texas to a sorted Australian public servant and a Victorian MP. Australia's Defence Department is sticking to its long-standing practice of not discussing specific cyber incidents, activities or capabilities. The Australian Federal Police says it will liaise with its federal government, state and territory partner agencies in regards to a response. Cyber security expert Wade Alcorn, the managing director of Alcorn Group, is aware of the case.
It could be from a data store, or what we call a dump, of a site or an organisation that's been compromised by a group of hackers, and they might have put that information possibly on the black market to buy, or it could be just publicly available and they could have stumbled across it. Alternatively, they could have actually compromised possibly a low-level site that people have used in common. I don't know, maybe a footy tipping site that may not have the same security rigour that, say, your financials would have.
What leads you to that assumption?
We're seeing a lot of sites being compromised, whether it be Target, whether it be a whole heap of other sites lately, and that information is still moving around the internet. So we've seen a lot of sites being compromised, and from what I